All right, you just heard the jurors read the verdict in the Jason Van Dyke trial, found guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. I'm here alongside Aaron Keller, as well as I believe we still have Vincent Hill on the phone. Wow, the prosecution was going for a first-degree charge, and the jurors found him guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree, which still carries the potential of a serious penalty.
It does. I've got my notes here that we've been passing across the table here. So this is an interesting one because this second-degree murder charge is basically the same as first-degree murder, as the judge said, along with a mitigating factor. And that mitigating factor is that the officer himself believed that he was justified when he pulled the trigger. So they did give him some credit. They credited his testimony and said, look, in this guy's mind, he thought he did the right thing, but they also found in this verdict that society would not have done it this way, the big picture, the objective standard, that this was really the wrong thing to do.
So basically, Aaron, they believed, the jurors, when Jason Van Dyke was testifying, that he was telling the truth, that he felt like he was in fear for his life. However, they did not think this met a greater threshold that a reasonable person would feel in fear for their lives.
Yeah, so a couple of different elements here on justification. The jurors found by delivering this verdict that this officer believed that he was justified in his own head. They had to look inside his own head and say, what was going on with this guy? And they found that he thought he was justified, but they also delivered a strong message here that this is not the way it's supposed to go down objectively.
Okay, Vincent Hill, your reaction to the verdict, second-degree murder.
I'm not surprised, Rachel. I mean, here's why Aaron alluded to it just a second ago. I mean, keep in mind, Van Dyke was actually called to a scene of an armed person. So back to what Aaron was saying, in his mind, he believed he acted reasonable in that split second, and I think the jury saw that as well, which is why we now have this second-degree murder charge.
All right, it looks like our feed just went black for a minute. Could be because the jurors are leaving the room. Oh, they're coming back in the room. Is that right, Talia, our producer? They're leaving. Okay, so the jurors are leaving. And again, if you're just joining us here on the Law&Crime Network, we've been waiting all day for this. Jurors have been deliberating for about 7 hours and a half. And they came back just moments ago with a guilty verdict on the lesser charge of second-degree murder. They did not find him guilty of first-degree murder. A couple of points to touch upon this, and that is we have been told, especially our freelance reporter on the scene has been told by civil rights leaders, protest organizers, specifically if the jury were to find a guilty verdict, even on second degree, that would not be enough, and that they would still take to the streets to protest this. Vincent.
Yeah, but the thing is, Rachel, it's too hard to prove first-degree murder in this case. You know, Van Dyke was just not a citizen walking down the street who happened upon Laquan McDonald and shot him. He was an officer doing the duties of his job. He was called to the scene there. We saw other officers there. So it's really hard in this case. Again, Laquan, at the end of the day, was armed. So it's really hard to say, yes, this is a first-degree murder case. I think the jury made the right decision here, in my opinion.
All right, it looks like there's some action in the courtroom. Let's take a listen. Wow, you just saw it there. Jason Van Dyke put in handcuffs and led out of that courtroom. He was found guilty just moments ago of second-degree murder. Let's talk. His bail was revoked. He's in custody. And there is a chance he could be in custody for quite some time. I'm joined again by Aaron Keller, a host here on the Law&Crime Network, along with Vincent Hill, a former police officer, also a host here on the Law&Crime Network. Let's talk briefly about potential penalties, Aaron. He was found guilty of second degree, which is the lesser included offense with first-degree murder. From what I understand, he could face anywhere from probation to 20 years for that. However, he was found guilty on all 16 of the aggravated battery charges, which, according to our producer, adds up to a minimum of 96 years if they run consecutively. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with that, whether they will do that or not.
That's really interesting. I mean, the question is would he be able to serve each one of the sentences on each one of the 16 counts there of aggravated battery? Would he be able to serve them together, or does he need to stack them up and serve one and then the next and then the next? But it's possible, if they do force consecutive sentencing, that he would have to serve more on the aggravated battery than he would on the second degree murder.
All right, and one quick correction here. I said he was let out in handcuffs because it looked like that just by his hands being behind his back. But my producer, Kathy, says that he was not let out in cuffs. He had his hands behind his back and was escorted out. But there it is. There is the video again. This is just from minutes ago of Jason Van Dyke being led out of the courtroom. I thought I saw handcuffs there, but I'm sure he will be put into handcuffs at some point because his bail has been revoked, and he is now going to go into state custody.
Yeah, I mean, this is the end. This is guilty. He's let off. He's got to await sentencing now, and that's when we'll start to see some of the unraveling of exactly how the judge is going to stack up that second-degree murder versus the 16 aggravated battery, and of course then the guilty on the official misconduct. We haven't really dug too far into that one. But different jurisdictions do sentencing different ways. I mean, we know in Nevada that they there tend to throw a lot of years at people and then let them out relatively early on parole. Other states have more concrete sentencing mechanisms within the trial court. Every state does a little bit differently, so I'm curious to see how they stack this all up. But again, if these aggravated batteries run consecutively, they could be a worse sentence in the second-degree murder. And the judge has such wide discretion in the second-degree murder case, the second-degree murder count itself. You know, is he going to be bold enough to say that that's probation, or is he going to be bold enough to say that it's the maximum of 20?
We'll see. Again, he found guilty of second-degree murder. Probation to 20 is the max behind bars, but then we also have those 16 counts of aggravated battery that we also have to contend with as we look towards the sentencing phase of this. And we were just playing that video over and over again of Jason Van Dyke being led out of the courtroom. And apparently, according to my producer, as he was walking out, the attorney slaps him and says, "You all right?" And he shook his head and said yes. It's going to be a long haul for Jason Van Dyke. It's been a even longer haul for Laquan McDonald's family, who have had to endure 12 days of trial, but leading up to that, weeks and weeks of anguish until justice has finally arrived for them, Vincent Hill.
Very long for, both sides. I mean, Laquan's family, of course, this happened many, many years ago. There was some sad incidents where this videotape was covered up by some city officials there. So there was a lot going on emotionally for that family. But now I switch gears and talk about Van Dyke's family. I mean, this is tragic on both sides. Really, there's no winners here, right? Laquan, he's not coming back. Van Dyke is now a convicted murderer. His family will have to adjust their lives accordingly to have to deal without him being in their lives. So it's tragic on so many levels, Rachel.
It certainly is. Aaron Keller is along with me here. As we talk about some of the security measures that were taken leading up to this verdict, from my understanding, there was some worry among local school districts because the verdict was coming in just as school was letting out. There was fear of protests and the safety there for the children as well.
Look, that's understandable given the outcry that resulted from the public in this case. And look, people were upset not only about the act itself, but the way that the officials handled it. And that's understandable because, look, we expect officials to be transparent, we expect them to be honest, and we expect them to be both in short order. In here, the video being released months and months and months and months after the act, that enraged people.
Yeah, and again, as we mentioned earlier, there is some understanding, and I'm waiting to get more reports from the ground in Chicago, but there is some understanding that civil rights leaders, protesters, perhaps even the family of Laquan McDonald, not satisfied with just the second-degree murder verdict or guilty findings by the jurors. They were really hoping that the jurors would find him guilty of first-degree murder. But, Aaron, as you've explained, there was a bit of a higher threshold the prosecutors had to meet on that one.
Well, it's sort of interesting because second-degree murder basically results in, from a big picture standpoint, a chance, or I should say not a chance, but second-degree murder results in a lesser sentence if the defendant is able to inject into the proceeding that he believed he was justified when he pulled the trigger. So here, that apparently happened because jurors said, look, this guy thought what he did was right. They credited him, they credited his experts, but they said, society says you're wrong. You shouldn't have done it that way. Even though you thought you were right, you thought you were correct, society says you were incorrect. And that's what this second-degree murder does. It splits the justification between the big picture and what's going on inside this defendant's head. And the result is a shot at a much lesser penalty because of that.
All right, folks, big day in Chicago. Jason Van Dyke, a former police officer in Chicago, found guilty of second-degree murder for the shooting death of Laquan McDonald. We've been covering it gavel to gavel here on the Law and Crime Network. Vincent Hill has been with me watching this verdict roll in, along with Aaron Keller. I want to say goodbye to Vincent for now, and I want to say goodbye. I'm signing off, and Aaron Keller is signing back on. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us here on the Law and Crime Network.